All right, so for the last 2 months, I put the most famous fast in longevity medicine up against a few cans of sardines. Now, the famous fast that I'm referring to is a premium protocol. It's backed by a ton of research, a lot of clinical trials, both human and animal data. Unfortunately, that protocol comes in a premium box and it's packaged for $200 per box. Now, the thing is, longevity doctors swear by it. Biohackers, they swear by it. The thing that makes this different is that the sardines only cost $40, right? So now, if you've been on this fear of the internet lately, you know there's a lot of hype surrounding the sardine fast. So I wanted to do an experiment where I actually compared the two. Which is going to be the better fast? Which is going to give me the best outcome? And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to see if, in fact, the sardines could outperform this premium fasting protocol that I'm referring to. Now, from my perspective, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this also was you don't engineer something and you don't create something and package it up into a $200 box unless it's doing something unique. It's doing something that the sardines can't do, right? And there was one measurement in particular that I really cared about, and it's a number that I really designed this entire experiment around, which we'll get into in a second. Now, what's interesting about all this was I actually thought that the premium protocol was actually going to outperform the sardine fast. And in fact, the opposite happened. And I spent years studying this. I've spent years looking at the mechanisms, and I still got it wrong. So here are the cliff notes. The $4 can of sardines drove me deeper into ketosis. It drove my insulin even further than the engineered protocol that I'm referring to. And in fact, my glucose ketone index jumped to 0.6. Right? Or I guess it dove down to 0.6, which is an extremely ketotic state. Now, this was deeper than the original protocol, the fasting mimicking diet got me. And the last lab marker, the one I cared about the most, I was sure was not going to budge with the sardines. And that's actually what surprised me the most. The cheap fish, in my opinion, beat the famous, more expensive protocol on every single metabolic marker that I happen to track. And from a compliance standpoint, the sardine fast was actually easier to complete and to adhere to. I actually felt better. If you're new here, my name is Andrew Reed. I founded MedGeeks back in 2013, and for the last 5 years, I've been rebuilding how I think about chronic disease from the cell up. Now, a big part of what I want to do here is I want to show you that we should be treating nutrition as an actual therapeutic intervention to the same level of rigor. We need to put nutrition in these therapeutic interventions with the same level of rigor that we consider doing for pharmaceutical interventions. And look, I was already aware of the studies between the fasting mimicking diet that was brought forth by Dr. Longo at USC. However, there's also been so much anecdotal evidence lately regarding the therapeutic effects of the sardine fast, so I wanted to try both of them. I ran both versions on myself about a month apart, and I drew labs on myself, and the results legitimately surprised me. At the end, I had a few counterintuitive anecdotal experiences as well that I'll share with you towards the end of this video. But really, the question that I wanted to answer was whether the magic that's associated with this premium fasting mimicking diet, did it stem from being in a low-calorie state? Or was there something special about this being a plant-based, low-protein protocol? Okay. Now, because if it's just the low calories, right, then the $200 kit is mostly selling a premium wrapper. Okay, the labs gave me the answer, and the results will change how you think about the fasting mimicking diet and whether ProLon is worth it for you or not, right? So let's get into some specifics here. And the lab number that I really cared about most here was a number or a lab marker by the name IGF-1. It's one of the cleanest signals that we have for understanding or knowing whether our body is leaning towards growth or towards fasting biology. Now, here's the short version. When IGF-1, insulin, the amino acids from your food, when those are all elevated at the same time, your body is biased towards growth and storage. When those signals begin to drop, right, in a way that you would see or experience in a multi-day fast, the system will shift into the opposite direction and towards conservation and cellular cleanup. And that shift sits at the center of some of the biggest questions that we are trying to answer in medicine today, from how we age to how we treat cancer, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. Now, just for context, the famous protocol that I'm referring to, just so we have context, this comes from Dr. Longo's research at USC, and it's intentionally designed to drive every one of those signals down that I just explained, okay? But because of all of the published research, because of all of the backing this protocol, this was actually the first experiment that I wanted to try on myself. I wanted to see what it felt like, and I wanted to look at my actual lab data to see what numbers changed. So I did 5 days. I ate about 800 calories per day. It was a plant-based with no protein at all. The protein was actually very low and was hovering only at about 10 grams per day. Okay. Now, truth be told, I actually felt great on this version of the fasting mimicking diet. By day 2, I actually had more energy than before I started. By day 4, I actually went rock climbing, and I did all my labs on day 5 for both versions of this. Specifically, I looked at insulin, I looked at IGF, and I was tracking my glucose and ketones throughout the entire 5 days for both. Now, with this plant-based fasting mimicking diet, my IGF decreased as expected, right? It went from 146 to 91. That's a 55-point drop in 5 days. Not bad. My insulin also decreased. It went from 6.9 to 2.7. My HOMA-IR, which is a marker for insulin resistance, landed at 0.51. So it's a 65% drop from my personal baseline. So not bad at all, right? And the last thing that I checked was a glucose ketone index, and that landed at 2.3, which is just inside the therapeutic window. And not bad, to be honest, right? The protocol did everything that it's supposed to do. Everything that I claimed it would do, it actually did. But it left me with a question. And that question was, okay, we have this 5-day diet. The problem is that it's changing 4 things at the same time, right? We're cutting calories, and it's pushing us into ketosis. It's dropping protein, and we're also stripping away the animal protein. So the thought process then is it the animal protein? One of the reasons why it gets stripped away is the animal protein has amino acids, and specific amino acids that they're looking at are leucine and methionine. And these are the amino acids that flip that build signal on. And so when my IGF-1 dropped 55 points, which of these things that I just discussed did the work? Was it the calories, the protein, the lack of animal protein, being in ketosis, right? We don't really know. The human research is honestly split between this. And so it's a little bit hard to decipher. Now, some advocates say, well, the absolute protein matters, right? Regardless of where you're getting it from. Some people say, no, it's the animal protein that's going to raise IGF-1 more so than any plant protein, even if you're looking at the absolute grams and they're the same, okay? Therefore, many believe that the heavy lifting that comes from this fasting mimicking diet is, in fact, because it is a plant-based diet. So I made a prediction, right? I actually bet on this being the case. I figured that the plant-based portion of this was actually the secret. And to me, that made sense. It made logical sense, right? From an amino acid standpoint. Not here to debate whether animal versus plant. That's not the point of this. It's simply from an amino acid composition. That was where I was looking at. That's the lens I was using to look at this through, right? And so I created a hypothesis, right? I was going to run the 5-day Sardine fast where I also kept calories low. But the difference here is, well, now we're including animal protein since sardines are animals, right? They're high in leucine, they're high in methionine, and I wanted to see what would happen in that situation. But I not only added in the animal protein, I actually tripled the absolute amount of protein when compared to the plant-based mimicking diet. So I did 2 things. I added animal protein in, and I increased the total amount of protein that I was eating. And I predicted, honestly, that my IGF-1 wasn't going to decrease all that much. And if it did, maybe it would drop just a little bit, right? And so here's what I ended up doing for the protocol. I ended up eating 2 cans of sardines twice a day, right? So total 2 cans a day. No affiliation. I use the sardines Wild Planet. Those are the sardines that I enjoy the most. It was packed in olive oil. I ate 1 can twice per day. So that roughly comes out to about 600 calories per day, and that comes out to about 36 grams of animal protein every single day. Now, by day 2, my ketones were already elevated. I was in nutritional ketosis. My glucose actually began to drop significantly. And I definitely didn't have this type of dramatic effect, especially not this quickly, with the OG fasting mimicking diet, right? The fact that I switched into ketosis more easily and quickly is the thing, in my opinion, that made this protocol actually more enjoyable, right? If you've ever been in ketosis, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never been in ketosis, then let me tell you that it's something that you can definitely feel. I don't need to check my ketones, right? I don't need to prick my finger to know when I'm flipping into that switch. I can feel it, right? And by day 4, my glucose actually dropped to 55. right? 55, my glucose. So on paper, that sounds dangerous. On paper, that's hypoglycemic. But here's the thing, I had zero symptoms. I actually felt great. I had more energy. Cognitively, that was the big one. Cognitively, I felt sharper than ever. And ketones jumped up to 4.9. So I was at a glucose of 55 with my ketones at 4.9. That puts me at a glucose ketone index of 0.6. A GKI of 0.6 is an extremely deep ketotic state. It's the kind of range that metabolic therapy research talk about when they're discussing brain cancer, right? Now, my fasting insulin also dropped dramatically as well, and it dropped all the way down to 1.4. My HOMA-IR, again, the marker of insulin resistance, was 19. And again, anything, in case you're unfamiliar, anything under 1 is considered to be excellent metabolic health, right? Every single marker that I tracked on this protocol went deeper than the original fasting mimicking diet, right? Deeper than the premium $200 version. And the number that I've been waiting for was the IGF-1. That's the number that I actually wanted to see what those changes were compared to the first and the second protocol. Because look, I was sure that the animal protein would prevent that number from dropping as much. After all, it's been established that animal protein is a significant driver of IGF-1. And so everything that I understood about this pathway, right? Everything that I understood said that this drop would 100% be less dramatic. But it wasn't. I actually had an 88-point drop. My IGF went from 163 all the way down to 75 eating animal protein. The plant-based protocol dropped me 55 points, right? The tin of fish dropped it by 60% more. So what's actually happening here? All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to picture a cell. And I want you to picture every single cell in your body that has two crews running at the same time, okay? We have a construction crew that's over here building, and then we have a cleanup crew over here that is clearing out all of the damaged, worn out parts, right? So we have a cleanup and a building construction crew. Now, which crew gets priority is gonna depend largely on IGF-1 and insulin, okay? These are the two big players in this game right now. When those signals are running high, you have elevated IGF-1, you have elevated insulin, it's the construction crew that is going to be running the show. Because at this point, mTOR is switched on, and the cleanup crew, right, a process that we are comparing to autophagy, gets deprioritized. Now, I want to be very clear. It doesn't get shut off, right? It just drops down the list. Many people on the internet are talking about autophagy and mTOR acting like if it's some light switch where it's magically turns on and off. But that's not scientifically accurate at all. In fact, I want you to think of them as opposing dimmers, right? Think of a light switch instead that has a dimmer, not on-off, but we can dim. And they're always running in the background. They're just running in opposite ends of the spectrum. So we'll always have some degree of autophagy, and we always have some degree of anabolism, if you will. And it's just a matter of the ratio, right? The other thing about autophagy that is completely wrong, that's talked about and often discussed on the internet, is people treat it as if it's a singular event. Meaning people talk about autophagy as if it's occurring throughout the entire body simultaneously, right? So number one, they say it turns on. Autophagy comes on after 72 hours or what have you, and then magically it happens throughout the entire body. But that's not the case, right? That's not true at all. In fact, it's actually tissue specific. When it happens depends on the tissue, right? It doesn't happen systemically all at the same time. But I'll leave that there. Otherwise, I'm going to go down this never-ending rant side tangent. So let's divert our attention back, right? Now, here's what I want you to know. During a fast, IGF-1 and insulin are supposed to fall, right? We're not putting in food, so these things fall, which then flips the balance away from mTOR, away from building, and in fact, it goes towards autophagy, towards this cleanup process, right? So the building is going to slow down, and the cleanup crew is going to move up, and they're going to start clearing out all of the garbage that the construction crew left, but was too busy to touch, okay? And it's oscillating between these two states. That's the game, right? A lot of people talk about one being better than the other. You need both, right? You need a time where you are build, and then you need a time where you're cleaning up, okay? You shift the system towards repair, and then you let it rebuild. Again, contrary to popular belief, one isn't better than the other. You actually need both. Now, there are some drugs that might nudge pieces of this, But let's be real honest here. There is no pharmaceutical drug that will recreate this entire process. Okay? Right about now, you might be wondering, okay, I get this, but why does it matter? Why is it important? Why do I want to push my cells into this repair state on purpose, right? What's the benefit? Why do I care? Now, to answer this, we need to understand, number one, why this protocol was even created to begin with. It wasn't built for weight loss. It was actually built for cancer patients. Now, the original idea was that fasting before chemotherapy seemed to push healthy cells into this protected low growth state. Meanwhile, cancer cells, they can't make that shift easily. And it's for that reason why fasting and these fasting mimicking diets have been studied extensively in oncology, and they show real promising therapeutic benefits, especially when paired with chemotherapy. And so changing the entire metabolic environment in an oncology patient has profound therapeutic benefits. And then we have aging. So that IGF-1, the mTOR nutrient sensing network, is one of the most conserved aging pathways that we know of. It shows up in impacting lifespan in yeast, in worms, in mice, and we also have human signals that are going in the same direction. Now, turning that growth signal down on purpose, okay, letting the cleanup crew do its work and then letting the system rebuild is one of the few interventions with a real mechanistic claim on how well somebody ages, not just for how long. Right? And then one of the things that matters most on a day-to-day for most people, it's insulin resistance. Remember, my HOMA-IR dropped from 0.51 on the FMD, and it dropped all the way down to 0.19 when I was doing the Sardine fast. I was at an insulin level of 1, okay? That marker of insulin resistance sits upstream of things like type 2 diabetes, of fatty liver, and it's really a big part and a big driver of heart disease. And now there's even talk about it being a part of Alzheimer's, right? So the research on this style of fasting, it shows real movement in blood glucose, in blood sugar, right? And in some trials has even been shown to drive type 2 diabetes into remission. So a 5-day intervention that can move insulin, they can move glucose, it can move ketones, drop the HOMA-IR and the IGF-1 all at the same time. This isn't just a wellness fad. Think about the entire physiology that's happening all at the same time. This is a very powerful metabolic tool that would be incredibly difficult to do with any type of pharmaceutical agent. And here's what I at least think is super interesting. When I added the animal protein back, right, and I tripled it, that's flood the system with enough leucine and methionine to keep the building crew on the clock, right? The answer that my biology gave, the answer that my lab would say no, it wasn't. Inside a 5-day low-calorie ketogenic fast, switching to animal protein and tripling the dose. Now, granted, eventually I think there is a ceiling, but at 36 grams, it didn't slow the drop at all. In fact, if you remember, my IGF dropped even more than when I was only consuming the plant-based protocol. So again, the branded, plant-based, carefully engineered package may be carrying a lot less weight than everybody assumes. It's touted as superior only, probably, right? This is speculation, only because there's a lot of research showing its benefits. Now, no one's disputing any of that research. I believe it's good data. If you look at the Sardine fast, however, you'll notice that there are no human trials that have been conducted for this type of fasting, this protein-sparing fast, if you will. But an important nuance that I want you to understand is that a lack of data isn't the same as a lack of effect, because absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, okay? No one has run the trial with the Sardine fast, which is very different from someone actually running the trial and then finding nothing. Okay, so very different here. And that points to what might be the most useful part of all of this, especially if you treat patients. When you cook calories this hard, right, you're in a caloric deficit. The body doesn't just burn fat. Unfortunately, the body will also start to break down muscle for fuel. Proteolysis climbs, and some of what you lose isn't fat, it's actually lean tissue. So that's the real cost of running a water-only fast, okay? We're losing muscle. We're breaking down muscle in order to get those amino acids that we need, right? They're essential. We need them to run, and they're essential because we need to get them from our diet, but they're incredibly important to run all of these processes in the background. And so doing a water-only fast has real drawbacks. because it can be detrimental and harmful for somebody who is already incredibly lean or maybe already sick. Okay, this is where, in my opinion, a little bit of the right protein can really earn its keep here. The research on energy deficit is consistent. Keep protein adequate while you're in a deficit, and you can blunt some of that lean mass loss with nitrogen balance holding up better than if you were to just drop the calories all by itself. Okay, and the proteins that are most useful for this tend to be the types of protein that are called complete protein. They're filled with leucine, right? That's the exact same amino acid profile that we're getting from sardines. And the slight addition of protein here, in my opinion, is the thing that's going to defend my muscles during this deficit. It's going to protect them from being broken down because we're putting some of these amino acids into the systems that can be used. Now, when you're doing something like a water-only fast, you drop the calories, and unfortunately, you will be losing lean tissue with it. Now, the famous protocol, the fasting-mimicking diet that's plant-based, right? It runs with a low amount of protein, and it's mostly plant-based, which means not as complete. Now, here's the thing that I actually noticed as well, and it's counterintuitive. After the 5-day protocol, I went back to the gym and noticed that my strength increased. Now, this happened every single time. And to me, this is counterintuitive, but it's happened every single time that I've cycled off and go back to the gym. Every single one of my strength gains have increased. Now, I want to be very clear, in case it hasn't been clear this far. This entire experiment was an N of 1, right? It's just me. Everybody is obviously going to be different, and so I can't generalize all of my findings to every single person either watching this video or listening to this podcast. But here's what I will say from a practical standpoint, and here's where I think it's nice. It's nice to know that the $40 version seemed to outperform a $200 version, at least for my physiology, right? So that's nice because the practicality of all this is price, right? If this cheap, unbranded fasting version that you can just get at any grocery store can reproduce the effect, then this stops being an intervention for just a few who can afford it, and it can actually be an intervention where it's accessible to the vast majority of people, right? For a clinician, again, this is a big lever. This is a big thing because the more people that can do this and where it's not so restricted on cost, the better the outcomes, right? The more we can use it. I also want to be clear that a fast like this isn't going to be right for every single person, right? If you're on a medication, if you are managing a chronic condition, definitely talk to a healthcare provider, definitely talk to your healthcare provider before you start to attempt any of this, right? Because again, we're changing real physiology. And when you change the physiology, you're changing the biochemistry, you're changing the entire landscape of your body. Things are going to start behaving differently. Now, what I'm showing you, hopefully, is what it looks like to take something that everyone just treats as settled and then find out that it's not. It's staying curious. It's staying open to possibly uncovering something new, right? Our model of medicine almost never asks these questions. It never challenges these strongly held beliefs. And if it appears as the truth, then it's regarded as the truth indefinitely, right? And to be clear, I'm not saying that ProLon is useless. I'm not saying it's bad, and I'm not saying anything about the science and research behind it. I actually think it has a real place, and the research is genuinely good. What I am saying is that the biology may not belong to the box, right? Sardines aren't magic either, okay? But the premium packaged box might not be magic in and of itself also, right? So there's almost always more than one way to get to a specific place. And that's the part that I want you to stay curious about. It doesn't have to be this way or that way, right? It's not this false dichotomy. It can be both. Two things can be true at the same time. Now, if you want medicine, if you want nutrition held to a higher standard with real data and an honest answer even when it's not convenient, please hit subscribe. If you found this video helpful, if you found this podcast helpful, please make sure to like this video. Please leave a review if you're listening to the podcast. This really helps get the show out there to spread the word. And as always, to better health with better science. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.